That night, I tweaked just a single line of code in our internal reporting system. By morning, the CFO was laughing in front of the entire company, calling my report an $18 million joke. Then the numbers on the screen twitched, and the name of the person responsible auto-corrected straight to him. I did not scream or beg. I simply sat there and watched the board realize that for 3 years, the only person capable of misplacing that much money was never me. My name is Brinley Hamilton, and at 36 years old, standing in the climate-controlled sterility of the Northbridge Meridian Group headquarters, I was currently the punchline of an $18 million joke. The boardroom was situated on the 42nd floor, overlooking the steel-gray expanse of Lake Michigan. The view usually offered me a sense of perspective, but today the blinds were drawn tight to enhance the contrast of the massive LED wall dominating the room. On that screen glowed the quarterly financial reconciliation report I had spent the last 3 weeks finalizing, and right in the center of the spreadsheet, highlighted in an angry, unforgiving crimson, was a variance that should not have existed. $18 million. Elliot Granger stood at the head of the mahogany table, his posture relaxed, his suit tailored to an inch of its life. He gestured toward the screen with a laser pointer, the red dot dancing mockingly around the discrepancy. "This is what happens when we get too bogged down in the weeds," Elliot said, offering a charming, apologetic smile to the 12 board members watching him. He turned his gaze to me, his eyes crinkling with faux sympathy. "Brinley is a brilliant technician, truly, but sometimes her systems are so sensitive that they double count a shadow for a monster. This $18 million is clearly a duplication error in the new analytics module, a harmless glitch. We are obsessing over a ghost in the machine." A ripple of relieved laughter moved through the room. The board members, terrifying titans of Chicago industry, preferred a glitch to a theft. They wanted the numbers to be clean. They wanted the stock price to hold. Elliot was giving them exactly what they wanted, a comforting lie wrapped in financial jargon. I stood at the podium, my hands clasped behind my back to hide the fact that my knuckles were white. I kept my face perfectly neutral, a mask of professional detachment I had perfected over a decade in this industry. Inside, however, a cold sensation was sliding down my spine, settling heavy in my stomach. I knew that number was not a ghost. It was not a duplication error. That $18 million was the tip of an iceberg Elliot thought he had melted down and drained away years ago. "It is an unfortunate visual," Jonas Mercer, our CEO, chimed in. He sat at the opposite end of the table, rubbing his temples as if the mere presence of conflict gave him a migraine. Jonas was a peacemaker by nature, which made him a terrible wartime general. He looked at me with pleading eyes. "Brinley, let us pull the report from the official record for now. We can scrub the system, run the diagnostics, and present a clean version next week. No need to alarm the shareholders with a software bug." His words were meant to be kind, but they were a professional execution. By suggesting we pull the report, he was validating Elliot's claim. He was agreeing that my work was flawed, that my code was buggy, and that I was the liability in the room. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. If I argued now, I would look hysterical. If I defended the math, I would look defensive. But I could not let the narrative solidify that this was a system failure. "With all due respect, Jonas," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the murmurs. "The data pipeline I built for this quarter operates on a read-only protocol for the source ingestion. It does not create data. It only mirrors what exists in the ERP system. There is no manual intervention allowed in the code. Every figure you see on that screen has a transaction ID stamped to it." The room went quiet. The air conditioning hummed, a low drone that suddenly seemed very loud. Elliot shifted his weight. It was a subtle movement, a slight adjustment of his cufflink. But I saw it. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. He knew that read only meant the error wasn't in how the data was pulled. The error was in the data itself. "Technically true," Elliot countered smoothly, recovering his composure instantly. "But if the logic meant to categorize expenses gets confused, It puts things in the wrong bucket. That is all this is. A bucket issue. Brinley built a Ferrari engine for a golf cart. It is just revving too high. He was good. I had to give him that. He could take a technical absolute and turn it into a subjective metaphor that these non-technical executives could nod along with. Then, a voice cut from the side of the table. "If it is a system glitch," Diane Rowe asked, leaning forward. Diane was the only member of the board who actually read the appendices of the reports. She took off her reading glasses and looked directly at Elliot. "Why does the glitch only seem to inflate the cost centers under your direct approval authority?" "Elliot, I am looking at the breakdown here. Operations is clean. Marketing is clean. The $18 million variance is entirely contained within the Strategic Restructure Fund." The question hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. My heart hammered against my ribs. Diane had seen it. She had pulled the thread. Jonas immediately jumped in, sensing the sudden drop in temperature. "Diane, valid question, but let us not jump to conclusions. Complex systems often have strange clustering effects. I am sure when Elliot and the IT team do the audit, they will find a line of code that just got stuck on a loop in that specific sector. Let us move to the next item on the agenda. Marketing projections." The screen flickered as the display changed, wiping the red $18 million away and replacing it with soothing blue bar charts of projected growth. The tension dissipated as quickly as it had arrived, the board members turning their attention to happier numbers. I stepped down from the podium and moved to the back of the room, taking a seat in the shadows. I watched the back of Elliot's head. He was nodding along to the marketing VP's presentation, projecting total confidence. He thought he had dodged the bullet. He thought he had buried me. An hour later, the meeting adjourned. The executives stood up, stretching and chatting about golf handicaps and summer homes in the Hamptons. I packed up my laptop slowly, my movements deliberate. Elliot lingered near the door, shaking hands with the chairman, laughing at a joke I couldn't hear. As the room cleared out, he walked over to where I was standing. He didn't smile this time. He leaned in close, invading my personal space just enough to be intimidating without looking aggressive to anyone watching from the hallway. "You are shooting yourself in the foot, Brinley," he whispered. His voice was low, intimate, like he was giving advice to a younger sibling. "You are brilliant, but you do not understand how the game is played. You push these numbers too hard, and people stop looking at the math and start looking at the person causing the trouble. No one is standing on your side of the line. Take the weekend off. Let the adults fix the glitch." He patted my shoulder, a patronizing, heavy tap, and turned to walk away. "I just want the report to be accurate, Elliot," I said to his retreating back. He didn't turn around. He just waved a hand dismissively over his shoulder and joined the gaggle of executives heading toward the elevators. I stood alone in the empty boardroom. The smell of stale coffee and expensive cologne lingered in the air. I looked up at the blank black screen where the error had been. Elliot thought I was obsessed with the $18 million. He was wrong. I wasn't obsessed with the money. I was obsessed with the metadata. My mind drifted back to the previous night. It had been 1 a.m. The office was dark, illuminated only by the glow of my dual monitors. I had been tracing the anomaly, frustrated by how the system kept flagging the transactions as reconciliation error, system generated. It was a default bucket for anything the code couldn't map to a specific employee ID. Elliot had set up the approval chains years ago. He had designed them so that any adjustment made at the executive level washed its hands of the user ID, creating a generic system log. It was clean. It was anonymous. It was how he had hidden in plain sight. But last night, I realized I didn't need to find his name in the past logs. I just needed the system to recognize him in the future. I had opened the source code for the reconciliation module. I scrolled down to line 4002, the section defining the logic for unmapped variances. I didn't change the numbers. I didn't alter the dollar amounts. I simply changed the autocorrect logic. Instead of defaulting unidentified executive adjustments to system error, I added a recursive lookup function. I told the code, If you find a variance greater than $1 million, do not look for the person who approved it. Look for the person who created the rule that allowed it. It was a subtle change, a digital tripwire, and it required a live run to activate. I walked out of the boardroom, the plush carpet silencing my heels. I felt a vibration on my left wrist. I lifted my arm and glanced at my smartwatch. The screen glowed with a notification that stopped my breath for a heartbeat. System reconciliation live run scheduled. 11 o'clock in the morning, today, triggered by E. Granger. A smile touched the corners of my lips, cold and sharp. Elliot had just gone back to his office. He was probably logging in right now to scrub the data, to replace my file with his sanitized version, just as he threatened. He thought he was deleting the evidence. He didn't realize that by trying to run the reconciliation himself to overwrite my work, he was doing exactly what I needed him to do. He was initiating the process. He was putting his fingerprint on the gun. The autocorrect was primed, and at 11 o'clock, the system wasn't going to fix the numbers. It was going to fix the name attached to them. The walk from the boardroom back to my office felt like moving through deep water. The adrenaline that had sustained me during the confrontation was beginning to curdle into a heavy, cold dread. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, the leather still cool, and looked at the framed photograph on my desk. It was just a landscape, a generic mountain range, but I stared at it until the jagged peaks blurred. My mind drifted back 3 years. I had come to Northbridge Meridian Group not as a conqueror, but as a survivor. My previous employer had imploded in a spectacular fashion, a victim of creative accounting that left 2,000 people on the street and the C-suite under federal indictment. I had survived the layoffs only to walk away voluntarily, sickened by the fragility of truth in the corporate world. When I interviewed at Northbridge, I made a promise to myself that I would never again be blind to the numbers. I wanted to build a fortress of logic where facts could not be besieged by opinions. Elliot Granger had been the one to hire me. Back then, Elliot was not the sweating, defensive man I had just seen in the boardroom. He was the golden boy of the industry, the turnaround genius who had pulled Northbridge back from the brink of irrelevance. He was charismatic, sharp, and seemingly obsessed with modernization. I remember our final interview vividly. He had leaned across his glass desk, his eyes intense. He told me that he did not just want a director of analytics. He said he wanted a source of truth. He told me that he was tired of guessing where the money went. He offered me a budget that was double what I asked for and promised me autonomy. It felt like a dream. In hindsight, it was a purchase order. He was buying my silence in advance, assuming that gratitude would make me blind. For the first year, things were perfect. I dismantled the archaic spreadsheet culture and began laying the groundwork for a centralized data warehouse. Elliot was my biggest champion. He approved every software license, every new hire, every server upgrade. Then came the first crack. It was a minor discrepancy in the second quarter of my second year. I found a variance of $50,000 in the marketing budget. The invoices did not match the ledger. When I brought it to Elliot, expecting him to be furious at the marketing team, he just laughed. He waved a hand dismissively and told me that it was a prepayment for a vendor conference that hadn't been billed yet. He told me it was a timing issue. He called it a narrative gap. I accepted it. Why would the CFO lie about $50,000? It was rounding error money for a company our size. But the cracks kept appearing. $100,000 here for consulting fees with no deliverables. $200,000 there for software implementation that never happened. Every time I flagged a line item, Elliot had a story. It was always plausible. It was always smooth. He would look at me with that paternal disappointment and tell me that I needed to stop looking at the trees and start seeing the forest. He would say that I should not overload the board with granular details. He told me that the board paid us to simplify complexity, not to amplify it. That was when I decided to build the pipeline. I designed a system that pulled data directly from the enterprise resource planning software, bypassing the manual entry spreadsheets the department heads love to use. I wanted the data to flow like water, untouched by human hands, from the source straight to the final report. I spent months coding the logic, mapping the accounts, ensuring absolute purity. When I presented the beta version to Elliot, his smile did not reach his eyes. He praised the efficiency. Of course, he marveled at the speed. But then came the requirement. He insisted on a final review stage. He wanted a manual adjustment table inserted right before the final visualization layer. He claimed it was necessary for last-minute accruals and high-level strategic reallocations that the rigid code could not capture. I fought him on it. I argued that a manual override defeated the purpose of automation. He put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard, and told me that algorithms do not understand strategy. He said that sometimes, for the good of the stock price, we needed the flexibility to smooth out the rough edges. He ordered me to build the table. I built it, but I felt sick doing it. It was a back door, installed at the request of the homeowner. The atmosphere in the office began to shift. I started noticing the way Monica Hale, our HR director, watched me in the hallways. Monica was Elliot's creature, a woman who viewed human resources not as employee advocacy, but as executive protection. One afternoon, she cornered me in the break room while I was waiting for the coffee machine. She leaned against the counter, stirring sweetener into her tea with agonizing slowness. She told me that I was brilliant, but I lacked political instinct. She said that I treated numbers like they were sacred, when really, they were just raw material. She told me that a quarterly report is a story, Brinley, and in any good story, the narrator matters more than the facts. If the narrator is boring or confusing, the audience leaves. She told me I should learn to be a better storyteller and worry less about being a historian. It was a warning. I knew it. She was telling me to stop asking questions about the manual adjustments. The paranoia truly set in when Riley Gomez came to me. Riley was 24, a junior analyst with a sharp mind and zero filter. We were working late one Tuesday in November. The office was empty, the cleaning crew vacuuming the far end of the floor. Riley wheeled his chair over to my desk and lowered his voice, even though we were alone. He told me he had been trying to reconcile the vendor list from the previous fiscal year against the current active contracts. He said he found 3 vendors who had received payments totaling $400,000. But when he tried to pull their tax IDs from the master file, they were gone, not inactive, gone. He tried to pull the audit logs to see who had deleted the vendor profiles. The system returned an error message. When he asked the IT department, they told him the logs had been purged as part of a routine storage optimization protocol. I felt a chill go through me. Storage optimization. In a company that spent millions on cloud servers, we were deleting audit logs to save space. It was a lie. That night, I started my journal. I bought a physical notebook, afraid to keep a digital file that IT could access. I wrote down everything. I noted the dates Elliot asked for the manual adjustment table to be unlocked. I noted the specific amounts he changed. I noted the names of the vague consulting firms that appeared in the ledger only to vanish a month later. November 12th. Adjusted operating income up by 3%. Moved $2 million from capital expenditure to operational expense. December 4th. Created a new cost center for strategic advisory. Transferred $1.5 million. I wrote it all down. But I did nothing. I was paralyzed by the fear of being wrong. What if I was just a paranoid data scientist seeing conspiracies in standard accounting practices? If I accused the CFO of fraud and I was wrong, my career would be over. I would be the crazy woman who didn't understand business. The turning point came 6 months ago. Jonas Mercer, our CEO, called me into his office. He was happy. The stock was up. He told me that the board was looking for a new vice president of financial strategy and that my name was on the short list. He said he valued my integrity. When news of the potential promotion reached Elliot, the mask fell off completely. He stopped praising me in public. He stopped approving my budget requests. He started calling me into his office for unscheduled one-on-one meetings. He would close the blinds and sit behind his desk, staring at me in silence for a long time before speaking. He told me that I was not ready for leadership. He said I was too rigid. He told me that at the VP level, you have to make hard choices. You have to protect the company, even from itself. He told me to pick my battles carefully, because some battles leave you with nothing but scars. He never threatened to fire me. He was too smart for that. He just made me feel small. He made me feel like an imposter. He made me feel like I was lucky to even be in the room. I realized then that he was afraid. He was terrified that if I moved up to VP, I would have equal access. I would see the raw data before he had a chance to scrub it in his manual table. I would see the adjustments before they became history. So he decided to destroy me first. That was what today was about. The $18 million error in the report was not an accident. He had deliberately manipulated the feed. Knowing I would present it, knowing he could point at it and call me incompetent, he wanted to humiliate me in front of the board so that Jonas would never dream of promoting me. I looked down at my hands. They were steady now, for 3 years. Elliot thought he was training a dog to guard his house. He thought he was buying a tool. He thought that by forcing me to build that manual adjustment table, he had compromised me. He was wrong. I had built the system he asked for. I had given him the manual override he demanded. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that I had never stopped building. While he was busy crafting his stories and polishing his narratives, I was building a mirror. I wasn't just logging the data. I was logging the behavior. I was tracking the keystrokes. I was mapping the timing of his logins against the fluctuations in the suspense accounts. I realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that I hadn't just built a reporting pipeline. I had built a trap, a digital cage that had been recording his every move for 36 months. He thought he controlled the system because he had the password to the adjustment table, but I wrote the code that the table lived in. I looked at the time on my watch. It was 10:45 in the morning. In 15 minutes, the live run would execute. Elliot thought he was scrubbing the error to save the company. He thought he was erasing the $18 million to make the problem go away, but the autocorrect rule I wrote last night was waiting for him. He was about to find out that in my story, the data matters more than the narrator, and the narrator was about to lose his voice. I was sitting at my desk, staring at the dual monitors without really seeing them, when the calendar invitation popped up. It was marked Urgent Sync, and the location was the aquarium, a small glass-walled meeting room near the executive elevators. The attendees were Jonas Mercer and Monica Hale. No Elliot. That was the first sign that this was not a strategy session. This was a sentencing hearing. I walked into the aquarium with my laptop tucked under my arm, my spine rigid. Jonas was already seated, looking pained, as if he were the one being persecuted. Monica stood by the window, arms crossed, her silhouette sharp against the gray Chicago skyline. "Have a seat, Brinley," Jonas said, his voice soft, carrying that trademark paternal disappointment that he wielded like a weapon. I sat. "I assume we are here to discuss the $18 million variance." "We are here to discuss the panic," Monica corrected. She turned from the window, her eyes cold and assessing. "The board is rattled. Northbridge Meridian Group relies on stability. Today, you gave them chaos." "I gave them data," I replied, keeping my voice level. "The variance is real. The system flagged it because it exists." Jonas sighed and rubbed his face with both hands. "Brinley, look, I like you. I have always supported you. But you have to understand how this looks. You built the system. You wrote the code." And suddenly, on the morning of the quarterly review, a massive, unexplained error appears that implicates the chief financial officer. "It is not an error," I insisted, "and I did not implicate him. The transaction logs did." "And who controls the logs?" Monica asked. She moved closer to the table. "You do? You are the administrator." "I built the pipeline to be immutable," I said, realizing with a sinking heart where this was going. "I cannot change the historicals." "But you can change how they are displayed," Jonas said. "Listen, I want to believe you did not do this on purpose. I want to believe it is just a glitch in your ambitious new code. But if the report is wrong, the responsibility belongs to the person who signed it. That is you." The room felt suddenly very small. The air was recycled and stale. What are you asking me to do, Jonas? I asked. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the polished table. We need to restore confidence, immediately. The best way to do that is to remove the source of the friction. We want you to step back from the approval process, just for a few weeks. Take some administrative leave, let Elliot and his team scrub the system, find the bug, and reissue the report. It is the clean solution. The clean solution, I repeated. You mean the solution where I take the fall for his embezzlement? Jonas flinched at the word. That is dangerous language. Brinley. I want to see the system logs, I said, my voice hard. Right now. Let us pull the raw server logs. If I broke the code, the timestamp will be there. If Elliot moved the money, his user ID will be there. That is not necessary, Monica cut in smoothly. She placed a hand on the back of Jonas's chair, presenting a united front. We have already engaged internal audit and IT to conduct a forensic review. You are too close to the project. You are emotional. You need to let the people with the proper function handle this. I am the director of financial analytics, I said, standing up. This is my function. Not anymore, Monica said. Not until the investigation is complete. Your access to the production environment has been suspended pending review. The words hit me like a physical blow. Suspended. They weren't just silencing me. They were locking me out of my own house. I looked at Jonas, waiting for him to intervene, to show a shred of the integrity he claimed to value. He just looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. Go home, Brinley, Jonas whispered. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I walked out of the aquarium, feeling the eyes of the entire floor on me. The open plan office, usually a hum of productivity, seemed to quiet down as I passed. They knew, in corporate America, the scent of blood travels faster than light. I reached my desk and sat down, my hands trembling with rage. I tried to log into the main dashboard. Access denied. Contact administrator. They had moved fast. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it, expecting a text from my mother or a friend. It was a notification from Proton Mail, the encrypted email service I used for my private journaling. I frowned. No one at Northbridge knew this address. I unlocked the phone and opened the message. The subject line was blank. The sender was a string of random alphanumeric characters. The message was short. Your fate is already decided. We are just writing the script to make it look pretty for the shareholders. Pack your box. A chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning swept over me. This wasn't just office politics anymore. This was a threat. I immediately opened a new tab on my laptop, not the company network, but my personal hotspot. I navigated to my private cloud drive, the one place where I kept the shadow ledger, my collection of notes, screenshots, and recordings of Elliot's inconsistencies over the last 3 years. I logged in. My heart stopped. The last accessed timestamp on the folder was not mine. It was from 10 minutes ago. I clicked on the activity details. The user agent wasn't a human. It was tagged service account, compliance bot. My breath hitched. They were not just locking me out. They were hunting through my digital life. The compliance bot was a high-level crawler used by IT security to scan for sensitive data leaks. Someone, likely Monica or Elliot, had pointed it at my private workspace, probably using the company's BYOD policy as a legal backdoor to scan my device. They were looking for my leverage. They were looking for what I knew. I closed the laptop snap. I felt exposed, as if the camera lens above the screen was an unblinking eye. The afternoon unspooled in a nightmare of isolation. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the glass doors of the main conference room opened. I watched from my desk as the entire finance team, my team, filed inside. I stood up, instinctively grabbing my notebook to join them. Brinley, a voice stopped me. It was Elliot's executive assistant, a woman named Sarah who always looked at me with pity. Mr. Granger said this is a key stakeholders meeting only. He didn't put you on the list. I stood there, frozen, holding my notebook like a shield. My team members kept their heads down as they passed me, afraid to make eye contact with the walking dead. The door clicked shut. Through the glass, I saw Elliot at the head of the table. He looked energized, commanding. He was pointing at the whiteboard, drawing diagrams, rewriting reality. 10 minutes later, a notification pinged on every computer screen on the floor, including mine. It was a company-wide memo. Subject Enhanced Oversight Protocol, from Office of the CFO, effective immediately. All analytical reports and data visualizations must be routed through the CFO's office for manual validation prior to distribution. This measure is to ensure data integrity following recent system instabilities. We appreciate your patience as we correct these automated errors. He wasn't just taking credit. He was branding my work as instability. He was positioning himself as the savior who would clean up my mess. I sat there, the pariah in the corner office. The silence around me was deafening. Then, a small pop-up appeared on my instant messenger. It was Riley Gomez. Riley B. Are you seeing this, Brinley? I can't see anything. I'm locked out. Riley, I still have read access to the back end. Someone just pushed a commit to the code base. They changed the query logic for the Q3 report. Brinley changed it. How, Riley? It is hard-coded. Brinley, they added a case when statement. Any transaction without a clear parent ID is now being forced to map to your user profile as approver. They are rewriting the history. They are making it look like you authorized the phantom transactions. My stomach dropped. They weren't just firing me, they were framing me. They were going to pin the entire $18 million theft on incompetent code written by a rogue director. Brinley Riley, listen to me. Do not touch it. Do not try to fix it. If they see you in there, they will come for you too. Riley. But it's a lie. The timestamps on the code change are from 5 minutes ago. Brinley, screenshot it, save it locally, then log off. Please. I watched Riley's status go gray a moment later. I hoped he was smart enough to listen. I packed my bag. There was no point in staying. The walls were closing in, and the air was too thin to breathe. As I walked to the elevator, I passed Elliot's office. The door was open. He wasn't there. He was still holding court in the conference room, but his jacket was draped over his chair. It looked arrogant, comfortable. The jacket of a man who knows he has won. I took the elevator down 42 floors, my mind racing. They thought they had cornered me. They thought that by cutting off my access and rewriting the code, they could control the narrative. They didn't know about the dead man's switch. They didn't know about the autocorrect rule I had deployed the night before. The one that wasn't looking for transaction IDs, but for the origin of the rules themselves. I walked out of the building into the biting Chicago wind. The sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the plaza. I felt small against the towering glass and steel of the skyscraper. My phone buzzed again. Another text. Unknown number. If you are smart, you will send an email to Jonas tonight. Admit you rushed the code. Admit you made a mistake. We can let you resign with a severance package. Do not let your career die with this $18 million. Nobody wins against the house. I stared at the glowing screen. My hand trembled. But the shaking wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the sheer, cold realization of their arrogance. They truly believed I had no proof. They believed I was just a technician who got lucky once. They thought that by locking the doors and turning off the lights, they could make the truth disappear. I looked back up at the building, counting up to the 42nd floor. You are right, I whispered to the cold wind. Nobody wins against the house. But I wasn't playing against the house. I was the architect who had poured the foundation, and they had no idea that the smartest trap isn't the one you spring on your enemy, it is the one you let them spring on themselves. I put the phone in my pocket and walked toward the train station. The live run was still scheduled, the system was still listening, and tomorrow, the house was going to come down. The next morning, the independent investigation began in a windowless conference room on the 25th floor. The room was usually reserved for sensitive HR terminations, and the air still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and anxiety. Jonas Mercer walked in first, looking more haggard than he had the day before. Trailing him was a man I had never met, someone who moved with the predatory grace of a shark in a tailored navy suit. "Brinley," Jonas said, gesturing to the stranger. This is Caleb Ortiz. The board has brought him in from an external consultancy to handle internal compliance and audit for this incident. Caleb is completely neutral. He is here to find the facts, nothing else. Caleb smiled. It was a practiced expression, involving only the mouth and none of the facial muscles around the eyes. He extended a hand. A pleasure. Brinley, I have heard a lot about your technical prowess. My job is just to untangle the wires and make sure everyone is protected. I shook his hand. His grip was dry and firm. The handshake of a man who had assured many people they were safe right before he signed their execution orders. Protected from what? Exactly, I asked, sitting down opposite him. From ambiguity, Caleb said smoothly, opening a sleek laptop. The board is concerned that the automation you built might have overreached. We need to understand the intent behind the code. For the next 2 hours, Caleb dissected my work, but as the interview progressed, I noticed a pattern. A true auditor would have started with the data source, the ERP system, the approval logs, the user access rights. Caleb didn't care about any of that. He zeroed in exclusively on my new pipeline. Let us talk about this autocorrect logic you implemented, Caleb said, leaning forward. You programmed the system to override the standard reporting hierarchy. Did you consider the risk of algorithmic bias? Is it possible that your code was written to aggressively target specific cost centers based on your own personal hypotheses? I felt a flicker of anger. My hypothesis was that the numbers should match the bank records. The code targets variance. Caleb, it does not target people, unless, of course, specific people are the ones creating the variance. Caleb didn't blink. But you designed the logic. You defined the parameters for what constitutes a suspicious adjustment. Is it not true that you have had professional friction with the CFO regarding his management style? Could that friction have subconsciously influenced the parameters you set? He was good. He was twisting the narrative from the CFO stole money to the disgruntled employee wrote a biased algorithm to frame her boss. He wasn't looking for a bug. He was building a psychological profile of a saboteur. Are we going to discuss the fact that Elliot has a manual override table that bypasses the standard ledger? I asked, trying to pivot the conversation back to the evidence. Caleb waved a hand dismissively. Executive adjustment tables are standard practice for high-level strategy. We are focusing on the automated system today, the one that caused the panic. During a brief recess, while Caleb went to get coffee and Jonas stepped out to take a call from the chairman, I pulled out my phone. I kept it under the table, shielding the screen. Jonas had said Caleb was appointed by the board. He said Caleb was neutral. I opened LinkedIn and typed in Caleb Ortiz. His profile was impressive. Senior partner at a boutique risk management firm. Former auditor at one of the Big Four. I scrolled down to his employment history, looking for the connection I knew had to be there. And there it was. 7 years ago, Caleb Ortiz had been a senior consultant at Stratford Vance. I opened a new tab and searched for Elliot's resume. My memory confirmed what I suspected. 8 years ago, before he came to save Northbridge, Elliot Granger had been a managing director at Stratford Vance. They had worked at the same firm, in the same city, at the same time. My stomach tightened. This wasn't an independent auditor. This was an old war buddy. Elliot had called in a cleaner. I pocketed my phone just as Caleb returned. He looked refreshed, ready to continue the dissection. Brinley, he said, I think we are making progress. I am beginning to see how a logic error could have cascaded into the $18 million figure. Before I could respond, my watch buzzed. I glanced down. It was a secure message from Riley. Riley, do not react, just read. I was tracing the access logs for your autocorrect module, the script you wrote 2 nights ago. The system shows a read access event on the source code dated 1 week ago. I froze. That was impossible. I hadn't written the final autocorrect script until the night before the presentation. I looked closer at Riley's message. Riley. Wait. Correction. They didn't read the script you wrote. They read the shell. Someone was monitoring your sandbox environment. They saw you testing the logic for beneficial owner mapping 7 days ago. User ID C, Ortiz Ext. The air left my lungs. Caleb Ortiz hadn't been brought in this morning. He had been in the system a week ago. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Elliot knew. He had known I was building the trap before I even finished it. He must have had a keylogger on my machine, or a mole in the IT department who flagged my activity the moment I started testing the new logic. This entire charade, the meeting, the surprise at the error, the investigation, it was all theater. Elliot had brought Caleb in preemptively to study my code so they could figure out how to neutralize it. They knew I was coming for them, and they had been waiting. I looked up at Caleb. He was watching me closely, his eyes searching for any sign that I was cracking. I needed to know for sure. I needed to see him flinch. "You know, Caleb," I said, keeping my voice casually conversational, "the interesting thing about that module is its resilience. Even if we delete the report, the system runs on a decentralized log. If we were to run a live reconciliation right now, based on real-time server activity, it would map every single manual adjustment back to the IP address that made it, not just the user ID, but the physical machine." It was a lie, half-lie. Anyway, the system could do that, but I hadn't enabled the IP tracking feature because of privacy protocols. For a split second, the mask slipped. Caleb's eyes widened just a fraction of a millimeter. His hand, which had been resting on his mouse, jerked slightly. It was a micro-expression of pure panic. He knew enough about tech to be dangerous, but not enough to know if I was bluffing. "That seems excessive for a financial system," Caleb stammered, quickly recovering his smile, though it looked tighter now. "And purely theoretical, I assume. We wouldn't want to breach privacy laws by tracking IP addresses." "Just theoretical," I said softly. "Unless, of course, the investigation requires it." I saw a bead of sweat form at his hairline. He abruptly closed his laptop. "I think we have enough for the morning session. I need to review these notes with the board." He stood up and practically marched out of the room. I walked back to my desk, my mind racing. The betrayal went deeper than I thought. It wasn't just a corrupt CFO. It was a corrupted system. The internal police were working for the robbers. That night, I sat in my apartment, the lights off, watching the city traffic below. I felt incredibly alone. The walls of my apartment felt thin, as if the eyes of the compliance bot could see through them. Then, my laptop chimed. Another email to my Proton Mail account. There was no subject line, just an attachment, an audio file named Meeting Room B11-19. Wave. My hand hovered over the trackpad. November 19th. That was 2 days ago. The day before the board meeting. I clicked play. The sound of a door closing. Then the rustle of fabric. "She is getting too close, Elliot," a voice said. It was smooth, clinical. It was Caleb. I looked at her sandbox code. She is building a recursive loop to bypass the shell company layer. If she deploys that, Greyline is exposed. Then, a second voice cut in. A voice I had heard give inspiring speeches at holiday parties. A voice that had once praised my integrity. "Let her build it," Elliot said. His tone was dismissive, arrogant. "In fact, let her deploy it. We will use it against her. We just need to tweak the input data so the variance looks like a calculation error. Just pin the 18 million on her system. Make it look like a glitch. The board will panic. They will not trust the numbers. And they certainly will never let a coder hold power again." A pause, the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "If we do this right," Elliot continued, a laugh rumbling in his throat, "we do not just fire her, we discredit the entire idea of automated oversight. We go back to the manual approvals, and we double the transfer to Greyline next quarter." The recording ended. I sat in the dark, the silence of the apartment rushing back in. "Just pin the 18 million on her system." He had said it so casually, like he was discussing a dinner reservation. He didn't care about the company. He didn't care about the shareholders. And he certainly didn't care about me. To him, I wasn't a person. I was just a buggy line of code that needed to be deleted. I played the recording again and again. They will never let a coder hold power again. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Elliot made one fatal mistake. He thought he was fighting a coder. He thought he was fighting a technician who lived in binary. Someone who would crumble when the logic didn't make sense. He didn't realize that for 3 years. While he was teaching me politics, I wasn't just learning how to count. I was learning how to hunt. He thought he was writing the script. He thought I was just a character in his play. I closed my laptop and stood up. "You are right, Elliot," I whispered to the empty room. "I am just a coder. But you forgot what happens when the code executes." He had set the stage. He had hired the actors. He had even written the ending, but he had forgotten that the entire theater ran on my operating system, and I was about to rewrite the final act. The next morning, I staged my own collapse. I arrived at the office 40 minutes late, which for Brinley Hamilton was the equivalent of not showing up at all. I wore the same gray blazer I had worn the day before, rumpled just enough to suggest I hadn't gone home, or at least hadn't slept. I skipped my usual coffee run. I kept my eyes lowered when I walked past the reception desk. It was a performance. I needed them to see a woman who was broken. I needed them to see a liability that had neutralized itself. The office was buzzing with the hushed, frantic energy of a scandal in progress. People stopped talking when I entered the break room. Conversations died mid-sentence. I poured a cup of lukewarm water, stared at the wall for a full minute, and then shuffled to my desk. I spent the morning in silence. When Caleb Ortiz walked by, I didn't glare or question him. I just nodded meekly, like a dog that had been kicked enough times to learn its place. I saw him exchange a look with Elliot across the floor, a look of satisfaction. The problem was behaving. At 10 in the morning, Monica Hale summoned me to her office. She didn't offer me a seat. She simply slid a single sheet of paper across her pristine, glass-topped desk. "This is a formal memorandum of understanding," Monica said. Her voice clipped. "It states that you acknowledge the potential instability of the new analytics module you introduced. It frames the $18 million variance as a calculation anomaly pending review. If you sign this, we can frame your leave of absence as stress-related rather than disciplinary." I read the document. It was a confession. It was a neatly typed suicide note for my career, admitting that my code was flawed and that I had rushed the deployment. "If I sign this," I said, keeping my voice hollow, "will the investigation stop?" "The investigation will conclude that we found the technical root cause," Monica said. "We can all move on." I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. I could feel Monica watching me. Her breath held. She needed this. Elliot needed this. They needed me to own the error so they could wipe the slate clean. I signed my name, but then, without looking up, I added a single sentence below my signature in clear, block letters. "Subject to final verification by system transaction logs at the upcoming board meeting." I pushed the paper back to her. Monica frowned, reading the addition. "What is this? Just procedural," I whispered, rubbing my forehead as if I had a migraine. "The bylaws require log verification for any financial restatement. I'm just making sure the memo is compliant. You want it to hold up if the external auditors look at it, right?" Monica hesitated. She looked at the sentence, then at me. She saw a defeated woman clinging to procedure because she had nothing else left. She didn't see the trap. She didn't realize that I had just legally bound the company to show the logs, the real logs, to the board. "Fine," she said, snatching the paper. "Go back to your desk." As I walked out, Elliot was waiting in the corridor. He had clearly been hovering, waiting for the signal from Monica that I had capitulated. He fell into step beside me. "I heard you signed. That was the smart play. Brinley?" "I just want it to be over, Elliot," I said, not looking at him. "It will be," he said, his voice dropping to that fake intimate whisper. "I will speak to the board. I will tell them you were under a lot of pressure. We will smooth this out. But you have to stop here. No more digging. No more looking for ghosts. You are done." "I am done," I repeated. Good girl. He walked away, whistling a low tune. He thought he had won. He thought he controlled the narrative because he had a piece of paper with my signature on it. I went to the small conference room labeled Huddle 4 at the end of the hall. I knew Caleb was scheduled to use this room in 20 minutes for a call with his partners. I set up my laptop, opened a complex diagram of the data pipeline, and maximized a specific window. It was a fabrication of flowchart I had designed 10 minutes ago. It showed a large red node labeled Autocorrect Ownership, Testing Only. I left the laptop open, screen bright, and walked out to get a water, leaving the door slightly ajar. I waited around the corner, watching the reflection in the glass partition. 2 minutes later, Caleb walked by. He slowed down. He looked into the room. He saw the empty chair and the glowing screen. He didn't hesitate. He slipped inside. I saw him pull out his phone. Snap, snap. He took 2 photos of the screen, then quickly walked out, heading straight for Elliot's office. They would analyze that photo. They would see the words, testing only, and believe that my dangerous code was still in the sandbox, that it hadn't been deployed to the live environment. They would think they were safe to manipulate the real data because the watchdog was still on a leash. I checked my watch. 11:30. I headed down to the server level. Most employees didn't know that the Northbridge building had a sub-basement dedicated to physical infrastructure. It was a noisy, cold place filled with humming server racks and cooling units. It was also where Noah Patel hid. Noah was a senior infrastructure engineer who had been banished to the basement 2 years ago. Elliot had publicly blamed him for a network outage that was actually caused by the CFO, insisting on using unsecure third-party software. Noah had almost lost his job, his pension, and his visa. He hadn't forgotten. I found him in his cage, a small workspace surrounded by wire mesh and blinking lights. You look like hell. Brinley, Noah said without turning around. He was typing furiously on a mechanical keyboard. I feel like hell, I said. I need a favor. Noah, a dangerous one. He spun his chair around. Does it involve hurting Elliot Granger? It involves burying him. I handed him a flash drive. I need you to look at the schema for the temporary adjustment table that Elliot uses, the one he claims is just a scratch pad for executive planning. Noah plugged the drive in. He ran a query, his eyes scanning the cascading lines of code. He frowned, then he squinted, then he let out a low whistle. This is not a table, Noah said. It is a view. Explain, I said. It looks like a local table, Noah said, pointing to the screen. But the data does not stay here. See this trigger? Every time Elliot saves an adjustment to this table, it triggers a replication job. It syncs the data to an external database. The connection string is encrypted, but he typed a few commands. Here, it resolves to an external endpoint. Who owns the endpoint? I asked. Noah worked for another minute, bypassing the internal DNS. It is a private cloud instance. The billing tag is Greyline Strategy LLC. I closed my eyes. Greyline Strategy. I had seen that name before. It was on the list of vendors Elliot had terminated 3 years ago to save costs. He hadn't terminated them. He had taken them over. So, I said, piecing it together, when Elliot moves $18 million to the adjustment table to balance the books, he is actually moving the money to Greyline, then he wipes the local table, and the money is gone. It looks like an expense that was paid out and cleared. Exactly, Noah said. And because he wipes the local table, there is no record of the transaction in the main ledger, just a hole where the money used to be. $18 million isn't a calculation error, I said. It is a wire transfer. I looked at Noah. If I go to the board with this now, Elliot will claim Greyline is a legitimate vendor and the transfer was a glitch. He will say the data map was wrong. He will wipe the external database before we can get a subpoena. So what do you want to do? Noah asked. I don't want to stop the transfer, I said. I want to sign it. I leaned in close. Noah, I need you to add a listener to the pipeline. Do not change the data. Do not block the connection. But every time that external sync happens, every time money moves to Grayline, I want the system to grab the session token of the user who initiated it. And I want you to force write that user's name into the beneficial owner field of the transaction. Noah looked at me. That requires root access. If they catch me, I am done, deported. If we don't do this, I said, they are going to frame me for the $18 million, and after they are done with me, who do you think they will blame for the technical failure that allowed it? The infrastructure guy in the basement. Noah stared at the screen. He looked at the blinking cursor. He thought about the time Elliot had humiliated him in front of the entire IT department. Grayline Strategy LLC, Noah muttered. Sounds like a shell company. It is a piggy bank, I said. Noah cracked his knuckles. Beneficial owner tagging. I can hide the script inside the fan speed control daemon. They will never look there. Do it, I said. And Noah, do not tell anyone I was here. You were never here, Noah said, already typing. I am just fixing a cooling unit. I took the freight elevator back up to the lobby. I walked out into the sunlight, blinking. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Elliot. Thanks for being reasonable today. Take tomorrow off. Rest up for the board meeting. We will get through this. I looked at the message and felt a cold, hard calm settle over me. He thought I was resting. He thought I was beaten. He thought the diagram on my laptop meant my trap was still in testing mode. He was going to go into that system. He was going to try to move the $18 million one last time, to hide it in Grayline before the auditors arrived. He was going to initiate the sync, and when he did, he wasn't just going to move the money, he was going to autograph it. I hailed a cab. Northbridge Station, I told the driver. From now until the board meeting, I had to be the perfect victim. I had to let Elliot believe he was the smartest man in the room. Because the only way to catch a man who thinks he is a god is to let him believe he has already created the world, and then you let him watch it burn. The air in the sub-basement server room was kept at a constant 64 degrees, but that night it felt freezing. The only light came from the blinking LEDs on the rack mounts and the glow of Noah's terminal. The sound was a relentless industrial drone of cooling fans spinning at max RPM, drowning out the world above us. It was the perfect place to build a weapon. Noah sat hunched over the keyboard, his fingers flying across the mechanical keys. I stood behind him, watching the lines of code cascade down the screen like green rain. We have to be surgical about this, I said, my voice barely rising above the hum of the servers. The module cannot look like an accusation. It has to look like a repair tool. If Caleb or the compliance bot sees code that says, "Find Elliot's fraud," they will kill the process before it compiles. It needs to look like standard maintenance. I get it, Noah said, not looking up. We are not building a trap. We are building a flashlight. We just happen to be pointing it at the one corner of the room they do not want lit up. Exactly, I said. Explain the logic flow to me one more time. I need to be sure. Noah stopped typing and pointed to a block of logic on the screen. Okay, here's the new reconciliation step. Usually, the system looks at a transaction and asks, who approved this? And usually, the answer is, whoever clicked the button last. That is how Elliot has been getting away with it. He gets a junior analyst or even Jonas to click approve on a batch file, so their digital fingerprints are on the trigger. But he loads the gun, I said. Right, Noah said. So, this new script, the one you wrote, ignores the finger on the trigger. It looks at the metadata of the routing rule itself. It asks, who created the path that sent this money to an unverified external vendor? The autocorrect, I whispered. It restores the chain of custody. Yes, Noah agreed. So, if we set the threshold at $1 million, any adjustment larger than that, which flows into a non-board approved account like Grayline, will trigger a recursive lookup. The system will scan the creation logs of the routing rule. It will see that Granger created the map that sends strategic reserve funds to Grayline Strategy LLC. Then, it auto-updates the responsible party field on the report from system error to Granger. It is perfect, I said. But we need to hide it. If Caleb checks the active scripts list, a file named Fraud Detection is going to raise flags. Way ahead of you, Noah said, highlighting the file name at the top of the header. Legacy Cleanup Script v4.2.py. Boring, Noah said with a grim smile. Bureaucratic, invisible. Everyone ignores legacy cleanup scripts because they think it is just deleting old temporary files. They will never look inside. Run it, I said, but run it in simulation mode. Do not commit the changes to the ledger yet. I want to see what it catches. Noah hit the enter key. The cursor blinked. A progress bar appeared, crawling agonizingly slow across the screen as the script chewed through terabytes of archived transaction data. 30%, 50%. It is scanning the last 3 fiscal years, Noah narrated, matching the gray line routing pattern against all cost centers. 90%. The screen flashed, and a table of results populated the terminal. I leaned in, squinting at the numbers, my breath caught in my throat. My God, I whispered. I had been looking for $18 million. That was the number in the current quarterly report, the one Elliot had laughed at, but the script had dug deeper. It had found every instance where this specific routing rule had been used since Elliot took the CFO job. The total at the bottom of the column was not $18 million, it was $39,420,000. He has been draining us for years, Noah said, his voice shaking. He started small, 2 million here, 5 million there. He got confident because nobody caught him. The 18 million was just his biggest haul yet. He is not just padding his bonus, I said, feeling sick. He is gutting the company. If this gets out, the stock goes to zero. We are all out of a job. Brinley, Noah said, his finger hovering over a specific line item. Look at this. I followed his finger. There were a handful of transactions in the second year, smaller amounts, around $500,000 each, that were flagged by the script. But the responsible party field didn't autocorrect to Elliot. It autocorrected to J. Mercer, Jonas. The room spun slightly. Jonas is in on it. Look at the metadata, Noah said, drilling down into the log. Jonas approved the transfers, but look at the routing rule creation. It says, created by E. Granger, approved by J. Mercer. I stared at the lines of text, my mind racing. Jonas signed off on the rule, I realized. But look at the descriptor Elliot used. He labeled the gray line account as Federal Compliance Reserve. Jonas thought he was approving a safety net fund. He didn't know it was a shell company. But the script doesn't know that, Noah said. The script just sees that Jonas signed the approval for the rule. If we run this live in front of the board, Jonas's name is going to pop up right next to Elliot's. It will look like a conspiracy. I stood up and paced the small length of the server cage. This was the nightmare scenario. If the board saw the CEO's name on the theft list, they wouldn't listen to the nuance. They would go into survival mode. They would circle the wagons to protect the institution. They would fire everyone involved, Elliot, Jonas, and certainly the rogue director who exposed it, and then bury the evidence to save the stock price. If I took down Jonas, I lost. I needed Jonas to be the judge, not the co-defendant. We have to filter it, I said, stopping behind Noah's chair. We cannot show the whole history, not yet. What do you mean? Modify the display logic, I commanded. Set the script to only display the top 10 variances by value. The Jonas transactions are small, $500,000 each. They won't make the top 10. The top 10 are all Elliot's massive withdrawals, the 5 millions, the 10 millions, and the big $18 million one from this quarter. Noah hesitated. You are suppressing data, that is, technically manipulation. I am prioritizing the threat, I said firmly. We take out the architect first. Once Elliot is gone and the bleeding stops, I can take the full logs to Jonas privately and show him how he was tricked. But if I ambush him in the boardroom, he will have no choice but to crush me. Noah nodded slowly. Okay, top 10 only, filtering by value, descending. He typed the command. The list on the screen shrank. Jonas's name disappeared. All that remained was a wall of Granger, totaling over $35 million. That is the kill list, Noah said softly. Save it, I said. Embed the script into the view logic of the main reporting dashboard. Set it to trigger only when a refresh data command is sent during a live presentation mode. Done, Noah said. It is sitting there, waiting, passive, invisible, until someone asks the system to explain itself. I checked my watch. It was 4 a.m. We had been down here for 6 hours. My eyes burned, and my body ached, but my mind was razor sharp. Go home, Noah, I said. Wipe the local terminal logs. You were never here. What about you? He asked, packing his bag. I need to make sure the scheduled tasks are clear, I said. Noah left, the heavy metal door clanging shut behind him. I stood alone in the cold, listening to the fans. I turned back to the terminal to log out. Suddenly, a system notification popped up in the bottom right corner of the screen. It was a scheduler alert from the main dashboard. System alert live presentation mode. Scheduled. Dataset. Q3 final consolidated V2. Presenter. Granger, time Friday. 11 o'clock in the morning. Notes, full data, refresh required. I stared at the notification, and a laugh bubbled up in my chest, a tired, hysterical sound. Elliot had scheduled the meeting. He had selected the dataset, and crucially, he had checked the box for full data refresh required because he wanted to ensure his scrubbed version of the numbers overwrote my original report. He didn't know that by requesting a full refresh, he was manually triggering the specific event listener Noah and I had just installed. He wasn't just walking into the trap. He was the one who had set the timer. I reached out and closed the terminal window. The screen went black, reflecting my own face. I looked tired. I looked like a woman who had given up. Good. That was exactly what I wanted him to see when I walked into that boardroom tomorrow. I wanted him to look at me and see a victim. Right up until the moment he clicked the button and the autocorrect spelled out his name in $18 million letters. 3 days before the board meeting, the wind shifted. The gale force hostility that had been blowing from the CFO's office suddenly ceased, replaced by a warm, stifling breeze of manufactured camaraderie. It started with an email at 9 o'clock in the morning. The subject line read, "Lunch, there were no urgent flags, no demanding capital letters. Just a casual invitation from the man who, 48 hours prior, had practically accused me of corporate sabotage. Brinley, let us get out of the bunker. We need to align our strategy before Friday. My treat." Elliot, I stared at the screen. Strategy, alignment, these were corporate euphemisms for surrender terms. He realized the stick wasn't working, so he was reaching for the carrot. We met at Le Monde, a French bistro 2 blocks from the tower. It was the kind of place where the menus had no prices and the water was imported from countries with better GDPs than some of our satellite offices. Elliot was already seated when I arrived, looking relaxed in a charcoal suit, a glass of sparkling water in front of him. He stood up to pull out my chair. "Thank you for coming. Brinley, I know the last few days have been intense." "That is one word for it," I said. Sitting down, I kept my hands in my lap to hide the fact that I was recording the conversation on my phone. Elliot laughed, a rich, warm sound that probably tested well with investors. "Look, I want to apologize. I was under a lot of pressure. The board is breathing down my neck about the quarterly targets. When I saw that variance on the screen, I panicked. I took it out on you. And that was wrong." He paused, letting the apology hang in the air like a peace offering. The waiter arrived, and Elliot ordered for both of us without asking. "Steak frites, medium rare." "You remind me of myself," Elliot said, leaning back. "When I was your age, I was obsessed with purity. I thought the numbers were the holy grail. I thought if I just showed the math, the business would fix itself." He took a sip of water. "But then I learned the hard truth. The board does not want math. Brinley, they want confidence. They want a steady hand on the wheel. Sometimes, to keep the ship steady, you have to ignore a few waves." He was positioning us as allies, soldiers in the trenches against the ignorant generals. $18 million is a big wave, Elliot, I said quietly. It is a rounding error in the grand scheme, he dismissed, waving a hand. But it is a rounding error that can sink careers if we let it. That is why I want to help you. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I have a proposal. We pull the new analytics module, just for now. We tell the board it is still in beta testing. You sign a technical memo I will have Monica draft it, stating that the $18 million figure was a result of a double-counting logic error that you are currently patching. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. He wanted me to perjure myself. He wanted me to sign a confession that would follow me for the rest of my life. And if I sign it, I asked, then the heat is off, Elliot said. I will smooth things over with Jonas. The investigation goes away. And next year, when the VP of Strategy role opens up officially, I will make sure your name is the only one on the list. You save the company face, and I ensure your future. It was a classic bribe. Sacrifice your integrity now. Get paid later. I picked up my water glass. Stalling. I needed to lock him into the lie. If I pull the module, I asked slowly, what report do we show the board on Friday? The agenda is set. They are expecting the reconciliation view. Elliot smiled, the tension draining from his shoulders. Do not worry about that. I have already prepared a static version of the report. It is clean. No variances, no glitches. It is stable. Stable, I repeated. Meaning hard-coded. Meaning safe, he corrected. So, do we have a deal? I looked at him. I looked at the man who had stolen nearly $40 million and was now offering me a promotion paid for with the very money he had embezzled. I need to think about it, I said. Send over the memo. I will read it tonight. Elliot nodded, satisfied. He thought he had hooked me. He thought every person had a price, and he had just found mine. He didn't know that the only thing I was buying was time. That evening, I was back in my apartment, the city lights of Chicago blurring through the rain on my window. My laptop was open, connected to the secure tunnel Noah had set up. A message from Riley popped up on the encrypted chat. Riley, you are not going to believe this. Brinley. Try me. Riley. I was monitoring the board pack repository, the folder where the final presentation files are stored. Elliot just uploaded a new file named Q3 Financial Review Final V2. PDF. Brinley. That must be his stable version. Riley. Right? But here's the thing. The board presentation software we use doesn't just display PDFs. It pulls live data feeds for the interactive charts. Elliot updated the static slides, but he forgot to update the data source link for the dashboard view. My heart skipped a beat. Brinley. Are you saying the dashboard is still pointing to my pipeline, Riley? Yes, he replaced the cover sheet, but the engine underneath is still wired to your code. If he clicks refresh during the meeting, which he always does to show off the real-time capabilities, it is going to pull from your live module, the one with the autocorrect enabled. I sat back, stunned. It was arrogance, pure, unadulterated arrogance. Elliot was so convinced that he had bullied me into submission, so sure that his static PDF was the only thing that mattered, that he hadn't bothered to check the technical configuration of the presentation deck. He was walking into the meeting with a loaded gun, thinking it was a prop. My phone buzzed on the table, a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. No name, just a menacing wall of text. This is your last chance. Do not be an idiot. You do not want to get dragged down with the auditors. They are looking for a scapegoat, and you fit the profile. Smart girls know when to fold. Attached to the message was a screenshot. It was from an internal Slack channel used by middle management, a channel I wasn't invited to. Manager A heard the analytics girl is going rogue. Manager B. Elliot says she messed up the code to hide her own incompetence. Typical. Manager A. Hope she has a good lawyer. If the stock tanks, I am blaming her for my 401k. They were already writing my obituary. They were painting me as the villain, the ambitious, incompetent woman who broke the system. My hands shook as I held the phone. Not from fear, but from rage. They were so ready to believe the worst of me. They were so eager to protect the status quo that they would cannibalize one of their own without asking for a single fact. I took a screenshot of the text and the attachment. I forwarded it to Noah. Then I compiled everything: the audio recording from the lunch, the screenshot of the text, the logs of the gray line transfers, and the email from Elliot inviting me to align strategy, and zipped it into a single encrypted file. I sent it to my personal email. Then I sent a copy to a lawyer friend of mine who worked in whistleblower protection, with a scheduled release timer set for Friday at noon. If I walked out of that building in handcuffs tomorrow, the truth was going to walk out right behind me. It was 11 o'clock at night. I was staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. When my phone rang again, I looked at the screen. Jonas Mercer. I hesitated. The CEO never called me. Not this late. I swiped answer. Hello, Jonas? Brinley. His voice sounded thin, stripped of its usual executive polish. I wanted to check in. It is late, Jonas? I know. I was just reviewing the board pack, the version Elliot uploaded. He paused, and I could hear the rustle of papers. It looks too clean. Brinley, the variance is gone, completely. He smoothed it out. Isn't that what you wanted? I asked, my voice cold. A clean narrative. I wanted clarity, Jonas said, and for the first time, he sounded like he meant it. I looked back at the approval logs for the Federal Compliance Reserve, the fund Elliot told me to sign off on 3 years ago. I trusted him. He said it was for regulatory safety. And now I am looking at the vendor list, Jonas said, and I cannot find a federal tax ID for it. Silence stretched between us. The CEO of Northbridge Meridian Group was finally waking up to the fact that he might be an accessory to grand larceny. Why are you calling me, Jonas? Because I am scared, he admitted. The vulnerability was shocking. If this goes sideways tomorrow, I need to know, is the report wrong, or was the first version right? The first version was the truth, I said. Jonas exhaled a long, shaky breath. Okay. What are you going to do? I asked. I do not know yet, Jonas said. But tomorrow, when you stand up there, just tell the truth. Whatever you know, say it. I will not stop you. The rest, we will let the board decide. The line went dead. I put the phone down on my nightstand. Jonas wasn't a hero. He was a man trying to save his own skin. He sensed the ship was taking on water, and he wasn't going to let Elliot drag him to the bottom. By giving me permission to speak, he was hedging his bets. If I went down, he could say he tried to manage me. If Elliot went down, he could say he authorized the transparency. It didn't matter. I didn't need him to be a hero. I just needed him to not cut my mic. I walked to the window and looked down at the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. The city looked peaceful, indifferent to the $18 million war about to happen in the sky. Tomorrow was not just about the money. It wasn't even about the fraud. It was about who owned the definition of a mistake. For 3 years, Elliot had decided what was an error and what was a strategy. He had decided that $18 million missing was a story, and my report flagging it was a glitch. He believed that because he wore the suit and sat at the head of the table, his reality was the only one that mattered. He was wrong. The code did not care about his suit. The database did not care about his lunch invitations or his threats. I turned off the light. I was ready. Let him have his stable PDF. Let him have his confident smile. Tomorrow, the autocorrect was going to run, and for the first time in the history of Northbridge Meridian Group, the error was going to be corrected, not erased. Friday morning arrived with the gray, suffocating weight of a funeral procession. The sky over Chicago was a flat sheet of slate, pressing down on the skyline as if trying to crush the secrets hidden within the glass towers. I arrived at the Northbridge Meridian Group headquarters at 7 o'clock in the morning. A full 2 hours before the board meeting was scheduled to begin. I was not there to work. I was there to plant the charges. My first stop was the executive lounge on the 42nd floor. I knew Diane Rowe took her tea there before the markets opened. Diane was the oldest member of the board, a woman who had survived the savings and loan crisis of the 80s and the dot-com bubble of the 90s. She had a nose for rot, and she had been the only one to ask the right question during the last meeting. She was sitting by the window, reading the Wall Street Journal. I approached her quietly. "Brinley," she said, lowering the paper. Her eyes were sharp, assessing the dark circles under my eyes and the rigidity of my posture. "You are early, and you look like you are preparing for a siege." "I am preparing for the truth, Diane," I said. I slid a thick, sealed manila envelope across the low marble table. It sat there between us, innocuous and terrifying. Inside that envelope was a physical backup of everything. I had printed the logs from the autocorrect module. I had included the flowchart tracing the cash from our operating accounts into the black hole of Greyline Strategy LLC. I had included screenshots of Elliot's administrative access rights, proving he had the power to purge logs, and while on a small USB drive taped to the documents, I had included the audio file of Elliot laughing about the $18 million joke. "What is this?" Diane asked, her hand hovering over the envelope. "That is the answer to the question you asked on Tuesday," I said. "But I'm asking you not to open it yet." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because if you open it now, it is just paper. It is my word against his," I explained, keeping my voice low. "Elliot will say I forged it. He will say, I am a disgruntled employee fabricating evidence. I need you to keep it sealed. Only open it if the system reliability is questioned today. If they try to say the data on the screen is a glitch, or a display error, or a lie, then you open that envelope." Diane looked at the envelope, then at me. She saw the desperation in my face, but she also saw the resolve. She placed her hand on the package and slid it into her leather briefcase. "If the system fails, I will look at the paper," she promised. "But you better be right. Brinley, if this is a stunt, I cannot save you." "It is not a stunt," I said. "It is an autopsy." I left the lounge and went to a quiet corner of the hallway. I pulled out my phone and opened my encrypted email client. I had one more failsafe to arm. I composed a message to a friend of mine, a former corporate lawyer who now specialized in whistleblower protection cases in Washington. I attached the same encrypted zip file I had compiled the night before. Subject: Insurance Policy Body. If you do not hear from me by 5 o'clock in the afternoon today, decrypt this file and send it to the SEC and the Chicago Tribune. The key is the date of my hiring. Written as words, I hit send. The progress bar zipped across the screen and vanished. I felt a strange sense of relief. No matter what happened to me in that room, even if security dragged me out, even if they wiped my laptop, even if they destroyed my reputation, the truth was now immortal. It lived on a server I did not control, waiting for a dead man's switch to flip. At 8:30 in the morning, the corridor began to fill with the muffled sounds of gathering power. The board members were arriving. I saw Jonas Mercer walking toward the boardroom. He looked pale, his skin carrying the waxy sheen of a sleepless night. He was walking slowly, like a man approaching the gallows. I stepped out from the alcove and intercepted him. "Jonas," I said. He flinched, startled. "Brinley, I hope you are ready." "I am," I said. I handed him a single sheet of paper. It was not a report. It was a summary of what the autocorrect script was designed to catch, specifically referencing the Federal Compliance Reserve, the fake name Elliot had used to trick Jonas into signing off on the Greyline transfers. "What is this?" Jonas asked, scanning the page. "This is half the story," I said. "The auto run today is going to show some things you need to see, things that might look compromising, but I need you to trust me." Jonas looked up, fear spiking in his eyes. He realized what I was saying. He realized that his name might be on the screen too. "Brinley," he whispered, his voice cracking. Am I going to survive this? That depends on you, I said, stepping closer. When the numbers change, Elliot will try to stop the presentation. He will scream that it is a glitch. He will demand that it shut down the server. I need you to hold the line. Do not let anyone call it a display error until we have seen the full logs. If you shut it down, you look guilty. If you let it run, you are just a CEO demanding transparency. It was a gamble. I was asking him to stand in the fire in the hopes that he wouldn't burn. Jonas stared at the paper, his jaw working. He was calculating the odds. Finally, he nodded, a sharp, jerky motion. I will let you speak, he said, but do not make me regret this. He walked into the boardroom, clutching the paper like a shield. I took a deep breath and checked my phone one last time. I sent a text to Noah. Brinley going in. If the system cuts out, or if my access is revoked midstream, push the logs off-site immediately. The reply came back instantly, a single character. Noah. The trap was primed. The exit was sealed. It was time. I walked into the boardroom. The atmosphere was markedly different from the last quarterly review. There were no pastries on the side table, no casual chatter about golf scores. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and expensive wool. Caleb Ortiz was already there. He stood by the podium, connecting his laptop to the presentation system. He looked confident, almost smug. He glanced at me as I entered, a smirk playing on his lips. He had seen the testing-only diagram on my laptop yesterday. He believed he had neutralized me. He thought I was walking in here with empty hands. I took my seat at the far end of the table, away from the power center. I placed my laptop on the mahogany surface but did not open it. I wanted them to think I was passive. Elliot sat at the head of the table. He looked immaculate. His suit was pressed, his tie a power red. He was chatting with the chairman of the board, laughing softly at something the older man said. In front of him sat the small, black plastic clicker for the presentation slides. He looked up, saw me, and gave me a small, encouraging nod. It was the nod of a captor to a cooperative hostage. Good girl, the look said. Stick to the script. Elliot tapped the microphone. If we are all seated, I would like to begin. We have a packed agenda today. Diane Rowe sat to his right. She placed her briefcase on the floor, right next to her feet. Before we start, Elliot, she said, her voice cutting through the room, I want to clarify the nature of this session. This is a special review of the financial discrepancies raised on Tuesday. We are not here for projections or strategy. We are here for accuracy. Absolutely. Diane, Elliot said smoothly. And I'm happy to report that after a thorough audit by Caleb and his team, we have identified the source of the confusion. It was, as we suspected, a technical instability in the beta reporting module. He gestured to the massive LED screen behind him. It displayed a title slide Q3, Financial Reconciliation, Final Verified Version. I have prepared a stabilized report, Elliot continued, picking up the clicker. This version uses a static dataset, scrubbed of the duplication errors that plagued us earlier in the week. It is clean, it is accurate, and it reflects the true health of Northbridge Meridian Group. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. It was a physical thudding, so loud I was afraid they could hear it. Elliot didn't understand. He truly didn't understand how the software worked. He thought that by uploading a PDF or a static slide deck, he was safe. But our boardroom presentation software was a web-based enterprise wrapper. It was designed to be dynamic. Even if the slides were static images, the dashboard frame, the container that held the slides, automatically initiated a data health check upon the first slide transition to ensure network connectivity. Noah and I had attached our listener to that health check. Elliot held the clicker in his hand. He was treating it like a conductor's baton. He had no idea it was a detonator. Let us look at the numbers, Elliot said, smiling at the board. I think you will find this picture much more reassuring. He lifted his thumb. I gripped the edge of the table. My hands were shaking, not from fear, not anymore. They were shaking from the sheer, electric anticipation of the recoil. Today, Diane said, leaning back and crossing her arms. We will let the data speak first. Elliot's thumb pressed down on the plastic button. Click, the screen flickered, the title slide dissolved, and for a split second, a small spinning wheel appeared in the bottom right corner of the screen. Status, refreshing data source. Elliot didn't notice it. He was looking at the board members, his smile fixed. He didn't see the line of code executing in the background, reaching out to the server, checking the transaction history, and finding the $35 million hidden in the shell company. He didn't see the autocorrect logic wake up. The slide transition finished, the new slide appeared, but it wasn't the clean, static table Elliot had prepared. The dashboard wrapper had hijacked the view, the trap had snapped shut, and Elliot Granger was standing right in the middle of it. Elliot Granger was in his element. He stood at the head of the boardroom table, the laser pointer in his hand dancing across the LED wall like a conductor's baton. He was dissecting my work with the surgical precision of a man who believed he had already won the war. If you look at this variance column, Elliot said, his voice smooth and authoritative, you will see what we call a mapping error. Brinley's code was aggressively categorizing standard operational transfers as discrepancies. It is a classic case of the software being too rigid for the reality of doing business. The $18 million was never missing. It was simply mislabeled, he chuckled, a low, confident sound that invited the board members to share in his relief. It is the digital equivalent of putting your keys in the wrong pocket and thinking your car has been stolen. A few board members nodded. They wanted to believe him. They wanted the problem to be a technical glitch, not a felony. Now, Elliot continued, raising the clicker, my team has remapped the data flow to show the accurate picture. This is the report as it should have been presented on Tuesday. He pressed the button. The slide transition was smooth. A soft fade from the error slide to the corrected slide. But as the new table appeared, something else happened. A bright yellow status bar materialized at the bottom of the massive screen. It pulsed with a rhythmic, urgent intensity. System notification reconciliation live run. In progress. Elliot frowned, tapping the clicker against his palm. Apologies. It seems the dashboard is running a background cleanup script. Just a legacy maintenance task. Ignore it. He tried to advance the slide again, to force the static image to stay. But the system locked him out. The dashboard wrapper had taken control. Actually, Diane Rowe said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the screen. I would like to see what it is cleaning up. Let us wait. Diane, really, this is just a display bug, Elliot said, his smile tightening at the edges. It is wasting our time. We have time, Diane said. Wait. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The only movement was the progress bar crawling across the bottom of the screen. 20%, 40%. I watched Elliot. A bead of sweat had appeared on his temple, sliding slowly down to his collar. He was staring at the screen, willing it to stop, willing the stable PDF to return. But the autocorrect module was chewing through the logs, matching the routing rules, identifying the fingerprints he thought he had wiped clean. 80%. The air in the room felt charged, static electricity building before a lightning strike. 100%. Reconciliation complete. The screen flashed once, blindingly white, and then the data table repopulated. It was not the clean, sanitized version Elliot had promised. It was the raw feed, filtered by the logic Noah and I had installed. The column labeled Responsibility Owner, which had previously shown the generic System Error or Reconciliation Gap, began to flicker. The text rippled, rewriting itself in real time as the script applied the new metadata tags. The first line item, a $5 million transfer to Grayline Strategy LLC, flipped. System error changed to E. Granger. The second line item, $3 million. System error changed to E. Granger. The third line item, the massive $18 million variance from this quarter, system error changed to E. Granger. A collective gasp went through the room. It wasn't just the $18 million. The list kept scrolling, transaction after transaction, spanning 3 years, all auto-correcting to the same name. Rule created by E. Granger. Beneficial owner, E. Granger. Elliot stared at the screen, his face draining of color. The laser pointer in his hand was shaking visibly now, the red dot vibrating against the wall. This is a glitch, Elliot stammered, his voice rising in pitch. This is exactly what I was talking about. The system is malfunctioning. It is defaulting to my user ID because I am the administrator. It is a coding error. He turned to the intercom panel on the wall. Get Noah on the line. Kill the feed. Shut down the server immediately. The speakers crackled to life before he could even finish shouting. I cannot do that, Mr. Granger. Noah Patel's voice filled the room. It was calm, amplified, and sounded like the voice of judgment itself. The script running on the screen is read only. It is not creating data. It is just reading the historical logs that were suppressed. Even if I pull the plug on the server, the history is already written to the off-site backup. You cannot delete it. Elliot spun around, looking for someone to blame, looking for an exit. His eyes locked on me. You, he hissed, pointing a trembling finger. You did this. You rigged the code to put my name on those transactions. This is retaliation because you didn't get the VP job. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Diane Rowe reached down to her briefcase. The sound of the zipper opening was loud in the silent room. She pulled out the thick manila envelope I had given her that morning. She tore the seal. Diane pulled out the stack of papers, the physical logs I had printed. She laid them out on the polished mahogany table, smoothing them flat with her hand. She looked at the paper, then up at the glowing screen, then back at the paper. Elliot, Diane said, her voice terrifyingly calm. I am looking at the time-stamped logs from the server backend. They match the screen perfectly. Every single transfer to this entity Gray Line Strategy was initiated by a routing rule created by your credentials. She held up a sheet of paper. And here's the corporate registration for Gray Line Strategy, LLC. It is registered in Delaware. The signing officer is listed as a blind trust, but the IP address used to manage the bank account resolves to your home network. Elliot opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish pulled onto the deck of a boat, gasping for air. Caleb Ortiz stood up. He looked pale, realizing his ship was sinking fast. Now, wait a minute, Diane. We need to be careful about interpreting raw data without context. As the compliance officer, I can attest that sometimes administrative accounts are used for batch processing. It does not necessarily imply malfeasance. We should pause this meeting and conduct a private review. I moved. I didn't stand up. I just reached out and pressed the spacebar on my laptop. The audio file I had queued up began to play. I had connected my laptop to the room's Bluetooth audio system earlier that morning. The sound of a door closing echoed through the high-end speakers. Then, Elliot's voice, clear and unmistakable. She is getting too close. Elliot, I looked at her sandbox code. That was Caleb. Then Elliot's laugh, the laugh that had haunted me for 3 days. Let her build it. We will use it against her. We just need to tweak the input data so the variance looks like a calculation error. Just pin the 18 million on her system. Make it look like a glitch. The board will panic. They will not trust the numbers, and they certainly will never let a coder hold power again. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. Caleb slowly sat back down, his face gray. He knew his career was over. He looked at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Elliot stood frozen. The recording had stripped him of his last defense. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't an error. It was a conspiracy, and he had just confessed to it in his own voice. Jonas Mercer was staring at Elliot. The CEO looked like he had been punched in the gut. His eyes were wide, a mixture of horror and dawning realization. Elliot, Jonas whispered, the Federal Compliance Reserve, the fund you told me was mandatory, the one you asked me to approve 3 years ago. Elliot didn't answer. He was staring at the screen, at the millions of dollars linked to his name. "You told me it was for regulatory safety," Jonas said, his voice gaining strength, trembling with rage. "You made me sign the approvals. You made me authorize transfers to a shell company." Jonas stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You used me. You made me an accessory to embezzlement." The accusation hung in the air. It was the final nail. Elliot wasn't just a thief. He was a traitor who had endangered the CEO. Elliot's face twisted. The charming executive mask cracked and fell away, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. He slammed his hand down on the table, the plastic clicker shattering on impact. "You think you are so innocent, Jonas!" Elliot screamed. His voice broke, hysterical and raw. "You think this company runs on sunshine and good intentions? We were bleeding cash 3 years ago. We were insolvent. I moved that money to off-book accounts to hide the losses so the stock wouldn't crash. I kept the liquidity flowing." He gestured wildly at the screen, at the damning evidence. "I didn't steal it," Elliot roared, his eyes bulging. "I parked it. I managed it. If I hadn't moved that money, this company would have collapsed 3 years ago. You should be thanking me. I saved all of you." The confession rang off the glass walls. If I hadn't moved that money, he had admitted it. He had admitted moving the funds. He had admitted manipulating the books. He had admitted that the financial health of Northbridge Meridian Group was a lie he had constructed. I sat quietly at the end of the table. My hands were still on my lap. I watched him unravel. Elliot looked around the room, chest heaving, expecting to see gratitude, expecting them to understand the hard choices he had made. Instead, he saw only shock and revulsion. He looked at me. I held his gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at the man who had laughed at my report, the man who had told me I was just a storyteller. "The numbers don't lie, Elliot," I said softly. "Only the people who report them do." Elliot slumped back into his chair, the energy leaving him all at once. Behind him, on the giant screen, the autocorrect finished its work. The status bar disappeared, leaving only the final, corrected ledger. Total variance 0. Total misappropriated funds recovered $39,420,000. Responsibility: Granger. Diane Rowe did not scream. She did not slam her hand on the table. She simply raised one finger, a gesture of absolute authority that froze the room instantly. "Stop," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of 40 years in the boardroom. "Nobody leaves. Nobody touches a keyboard." She picked up the landline phone sitting in the center of the table and dialed a 4-digit extension. "Send them in," she commanded. The double doors opened immediately. 3 people walked in. 2 were men in dark suits, whom I recognized as the company's external legal counsel. The 3rd was a woman I did not know, carrying a heavy, secure server laptop. She wore the lanyard of our external auditing firm. Elliot stared at them, his mouth opening and closing. "Diane, this is an internal meeting. You cannot just ambush the CFO with outside counsel." "It stopped being an internal meeting the moment you admitted to off-book accounting." "Elliot," Diane said coldly. She gestured to the auditor. "This is Sarah. I asked her to wait outside with a clean, air-gapped backup of our financial database, one that has not been touched by our internal IT network since last night." Diane turned to me. "Brinley, give Sarah the script." I nodded. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket, the same one Noah and I had used in the server room, and slid it across the mahogany table. Sarah took the drive. She plugged it into her secure laptop. The room was deadly silent. The only sound was the clicking of keys as she mounted the drive and initiated the query against the backup data. Elliot stood there, trapped. He could not claim it was a glitch in the presentation software anymore. He could not claim I had hacked the boardroom screen. This was an independent audit, happening in real time, on a machine he could not control. "Running reconciliation logic now," Sarah announced. Her voice was neutral, bored even. To her, this was just math. We waited. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. "Match confirmed," Sarah said, turning her screen so the board could see. The script identifies 42 separate routing rules created by user ID E, Granger directing funds to Grayline strategy. Total value matches the screen display, $39,420,000. The air went out of the room. It was over. The technical defense was dead. Brinley, Diane said, turning to me. Explain the logic, briefly. I stood up. I didn't need notes. I didn't need a laser pointer. The module does not create data, I said, looking directly at the board members. It is a mirror. For 3 years, the reporting system was programmed to look only at the final approval stamp, which Elliot often delegated to others. My script simply instructed the system to look one step deeper. It looks for the architect of the rule, not just the person who pressed the button. It does not frame anyone. It just reads the history that was already there. Elliot let out a sharp, bitter laugh. He turned to the board, his face flushed with a desperate, ugly anger. You are going to listen to her, he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is a mid-level director who is angry because I blocked her promotion. This is a hit job. She is twisting the context to make standard liquidity management look like theft because she wanted the VP title. He was flailing. He was trying to make it personal, hoping that if he could drag me down into the mud with him, the board would dismiss us both as toxic elements. Diane didn't even blink. She reached into the manila envelope I had given her. She pulled out the stack of documents and laid them out on the table like a royal flush. The promotion is irrelevant, Elliot, Diane said. She tapped the first document. This is the IP log showing you accessing the Grayline bank account from your home network. She tapped the second document. This is the email thread where you instructed IT to purge the logs. She tapped the third item, the small USB drive containing the audio file. And we have all just heard you admit, in your own voice, that you intended to frame Brinley for an $18 million error to hide your own actions. She looked up at him. There is no context that explains this away. You are done. Elliot looked at the pile of evidence. He looked at Caleb, who was staring at his shoes. He looked at Jonas. Jonas Mercer sat heavily in his chair. His face was gray. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. He knew that his signature was on some of those approvals. He knew that by all rights, he should be going down too. I approve those transfers, Jonas said, his voice quiet. I trusted you. Elliot, you told me it was compliance. You told me we were protecting the company. Jonas looked up, meeting the eyes of the legal counsel. I accept full responsibility for my lack of oversight. If the board requires my resignation, you will have it by the end of the day. But let the record show one thing. He pointed at me. If Brinley had not forced this report onto the screen today, Jonas said, we would never have known. We would have let him steal another $18 million next quarter. She is the only reason we still have a company to save. It was a shrewd move by Jonas, falling on his sword just enough to look noble, while positioning himself as the victim of betrayal. But he was right. The lead attorney stepped forward. He didn't look at Elliot with anger. He looked at him like a liability that needed to be liquidated. Mr. Granger, the attorney said, effective immediately. You are placed on unpaid suspension pending the conclusion of a federal inquiry. Your access to all company systems, premises, and accounts is revoked. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building. You cannot do this, Elliot whispered. I am the CFO. Not anymore, Diane said. The doors opened again. 2 security guards, large and silent, stepped in. They didn't grab him. They just stood there, waiting. Elliot straightened his jacket. He tried to summon one last shred of dignity. He looked around the room, trying to find a friendly face, but the boardroom was a desert. He had burned every bridge in his pursuit of the perfect narrative. He turned to leave. As he walked past the table, he stopped next to me. He loomed over me, his shadow falling across my notepad. I could smell the expensive cologne that was now just the scent of a criminal. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to whisper one last threat, one last insult. I didn't say a word. I didn't look up at him. I simply leaned my body to the right, shielding my laptop with my shoulder. It was a small gesture, instinctive, but it said everything. You don't get to touch this anymore. You don't get to touch my work, my code, or my truth. Elliot flinched as if I had slapped him. He saw the laptop, the tool he had mocked, the machine he thought was irrelevant, and realized it was the weapon that had killed his career. He walked out the door. The security guards followed him. The heavy doors clicked shut, sealing the silence inside. On the screen behind where he had stood, the dashboard was still active. The bright red letters were frozen in place. Autocorrect applied, beneficial owner, updated from system to E. Granger. It hung there like a verdict. The meeting dissolved quickly after that. The lawyers ushered the board members out to a secure room to discuss damage control and press releases. Caleb Ortiz slunk out the back door. His career at Northbridge, and likely anywhere else, finished. Diane Rowe was the last one to leave. She packed the manila envelope back into her briefcase. She paused at the door and looked back at me. "Brinley," she said. "Yes, Diane. We are going to need an interim CFO," she said. "Someone who knows where the bodies are buried, and someone who knows how to read the map." She didn't smile. Diane wasn't a smiling woman, but she nodded. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in the data more than the narrative." She closed the door. I was alone in the boardroom. The hum of the projector fan was the only sound. I looked up at the massive LED wall one last time. The number $18 million was still there, but it no longer looked terrifying. It no longer looked like a mistake that would end my life. It just looked like a number, a fact, a piece of data that had finally found its way home. I thought about Elliot's laugh. I thought about the way he had told me to simplify the story. I thought about the text messages threatening me to quit. He had spent 3 years trying to edit reality. He thought he could use a red pen to cross out the truth. But he forgot the most basic rule of the system I had built. You can delete the log, you can hide the column, you can fire the analyst, but eventually, the system always reconciles. I reached out and closed my laptop. The screen went black. The $18 million error was gone. The autocorrect was complete. And finally, the name in the responsibility column was the right one. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate justice served cold. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your office, your commute, or maybe hiding in the server room? Let me know in the comments below to connect with our community. And if you enjoyed watching the truth come out, please make sure to subscribe to Boss Revenge Stories. Like this video, and hit that hype button so we can get this story heard by as many people as possible. Until next time, keep your receipts.